Justin A.W. Blair here with you. I'm a writer, I'm a painter, I am a YouTube video creator. So many things, a man of many seasons, a modern Renaissance man in many ways. I am bringing you it's not even a review. Let's stop, cut the tape. It's not a review, it's a conversation between me and you about a fantasy book, which perhaps you have read, perhaps you've heard about, perhaps you've thought to yourself, maybe I'll check this book out. Maybe it's sitting on your shelf, which is sagging with the weight of so many unread volumes, and you're thinking to yourself, I'll do a little search on the internet, see what other people have said about this book before I devote the time to read it. And that's why I'm here. I'm here to help you because I read a lot. I do. I don't like long commercials in the middle of a YouTube video, so I'll get to the point quick. My own novel, written by me, Justin A.W. Blair, entitled The Haunt on the Island of Esmer, is out, available on Amazon. You can buy it in ebook or paperback format. It is inspired by Malazan, A Song of Ice and Fire, and The Black Company. Epic novels in that vein. Take a moment, check it out. I write, I paint, I read, and I am bringing you today a conversation about Kevin J. Anderson's Gamearth. We're going to pronounce it Gamearth. All right. I was not aware of this author, but the name rang a little bit of a bell in my head. I says to myself, that name's familiar. Who's Kevin J. Anderson? So I went on the internet, did some typing, looked him up. I said to myself, that's where I recognize that name. He wrote the prequel Dune novels with Dune Guy's son, I guess it is. And I've never read those. I'm going to make an admission here because we're relaxed. We're having a nice conversation. I'll give you a revelation. You may be longtime viewers of the channel. You may say to yourself, this Justin A.W. Blair, he seems to know a little bit about fantasy. He seems to know a little bit about fantasy writing. I'm sure he has read the seminal science fiction novel, Dune. And I'm here to tell you, I have only read half of Dune. I am not a Dune advocate or Dune enjoyer. I had some problems with that. That's going to be a different video because someday I do believe I will finish reading Dune. And then I will bring my thoughts to you about that. So let's ignore that for the moment because we have plenty of topics to get to about this book. We're going to talk about Portal Fantasy. We are going to talk about lit RPG. And we're going to talk about two traditional themes that I found in this book, which I'd like to bring to your awareness. And then we're going to talk about a few of the problems I have with the book and a few of the things I think that the book did well. So let's talk about lit RPG, which is something I actually know very little about, so we won't linger on this topic. What I will say is that Gamearth is the first book in a trilogy. I don't have on hand here the name of the trilogy. I'm sure you can look it up. It was republished, I believe, in 2021 or 2022 under a different name, the entire trilogy. Edited slightly from what I understand and republished. Now, what I do know about lit RPG is apparently it's a subgenre of fantasy which has become more popular in the last few years. In general, my understanding is that the characters in the books are, in essence, in a video game world and or a kind of Dungeons and Dragons role-playing game world, and the characters, I believe, are usually aware of it, sometimes perhaps not, but we read the characters in a lit RPG novel as they gain strength and agility, and they gain treasure. Essentially, it's like you're reading a narrative of a role-playing game campaign. Now, I'm sure many of you will get to typing in the comments and say, Justin A.W. Blair, that is not correct. Here's what lit RPG is. You know what? It's a conversation. It's calm and it's a conversation. And I endorse it. Write it up in the comments. I don't know. I've never read Dune. I've read half of Dune. I've never read any lit RPG. I'm a man of the classics. And again, I stumbled upon this book. I've said before, I ran to a bit of a treasure trove, a cache or cake, I don't know how to pronounce it, of old paperbacks, old fantasy and science fiction paperbacks in a library. And I said to myself, I'm going to grab all those, bundle them up in my arms, and I'm going to go buy them, and I'm going to read them, and I'm going to bring some content. I hate the word content to the viewers. I want to explore 80s and 90s fantasy science fiction because that's what the time period seemed like from the cover art most of these books were from. Now, let's get into it. So, in terms of lit RPG, and we won't linger on this topic, like I said, in terms of lit RPG, the characters in the book that we follow are, most of them anyway, are aware that they are in a game. Okay? In the narrative, we have the players of the actual game, which are 4 or 5 youths from the 80s and 90s, typical youths. There is a kind of a nerdy guy. There's a tough guy kind of wearing a denim jacket and probably got a Def Leppard t-shirt on. He just maybe smoking a Marlboro and at the arcade. Who knows? He's in there. I think his name is David. And they're all just simple names like Stacy and David and John or whatever. Doesn't really matter because we don't spend a lot of time with those characters. But we do bounce back and forth a few times to the higher level to see the actual characters that are playing Gamearth. And there is a problem. A couple of the players are bored with the game, but more on that later. For the most part, we are with the characters that are actually of the game, in the game world. And one problem I have with this is there's a lot of names of these characters, and many of them are not particularly important. A lot of the character names are not particularly creative. And again, we'll stop here for a second to examine one of the problems. Unfortunately, a lot of the book essentially is a rather, I won't say entirely boring, but a bit of a boring Dungeons and Dragons game. Now, the problem with that is that it's boring to read in places, and it's obvious what's going to happen in places. The meta commentary here is that many of the characters know that it's boring. In fact, this world has become more boring in recent times. The world here is so obviously influenced by the game that it seems that the characters in the world actually often do roll not dice, but objects like gems and other things which have a dice roll aspect to it. So there'll be aspects of the gem, 6 sides to a gem or something, and they'll roll it. And they know that they're rolling to influence what is going to happen next, like a spell that is going to be cast or the efficacy of a spell which they are casting. Kind of interesting. The thing to say about this, and where it does succeed, I suppose, in some ways, is that I do believe, and I didn't research it exhaustively, I do believe this is kind of like the proto-lit-rpg novel. I mean, I'm not sure, I'm certainly not aware of a novel that did this before, which made the characters, the main characters in the book, basically game pieces in what is essentially a Dungeons and Dragons game. So that is an innovation. It does provide actually some interesting ideas, which we'll get on to later here. But that's what it is. So you have to salute Mr. Anderson for coming up with that idea first. If he did, leave in the comments if I'm wrong. I'm not a fact-based channel. I'm a feeling-based channel. All right. So if I'm wrong about that, feel free to correct me. Now, a brief note on what I have termed portal fantasy. I'm not sure if that's exactly right. You'll see in some of my other videos this concept of portal fantasy and how it seems to be integral to almost to a large amount of fantasy written in the 80s and early 90s. In other words, we can't just have a story and it's set entirely in a secondary world of people doing things in that secondary world. In 80s and 90s fantasy, it seems like we often need to have the narrative structured where there are people in the primary world, our own world, who are then entering into or making us as a reader enter into a secondary world, often through a portal or a magic spell or something. This is something which I'm examining while reading 80s and 90s fantasy and wondering to myself, was this just influenced by Dungeons and Dragons itself? Was this influenced by a lack of confidence in authors to want to just set things entirely in a secondary world and let the secondary world go? There's a related subgenre to this, I suppose, which is the Dead Earth genre, I think it would be called, by Jack Vance. That is that this secondary fantasy world which we are reading about is actually just the Earth, but millions of years in the future, or something like that. And then oftentimes there'll be little clues which we are led to, and we see, oh, I bet that was actually just Earth a long time ago. It seemed like there was something in early fantasy which couldn't quite allow for, at least as often as it does today, the ability for an author, a novel, to just simply be set in a secondary world without any excuse, without any explanation, without any argument to say, oh, this is actually a parallel world to the primary world where we see characters enter into it. And I find that a bit of an obstacle oftentimes. It removes me a little bit because I'm always thinking, okay, is this actually just Earth, or what's going on here? It doesn't necessarily destroy a story for me, but it's just something I've noticed. It seems like there's a necessity in this 80s and 90s fantasy to say there's going to be a portal into this world. Okay. Conclude on this topic, there is something, a kind of meta postmodern thing happening here with the portal fantasy, which is that the primary, or the characters which are the imaginations of the people in the primary world, are aware of their own existence bounded by those characters in the primary world. And this sets up a kind of existentialist problem which isn't explored in too much depth in the book. I think it would have been interesting to see more exploration of that. We do get hints of it. We do get understandings of how certain types of characters in this magical world deal with that realization. So I'm going to outline a few of the small problems I had with it, and then we're going to touch on a couple of themes which I found. I don't know how you'd want to say it, really traditional, I suppose. I mean, I don't particularly consider them conservative or reactionary views. I think it's just the standard way people looked at things in the 80s and 90s, but I'll let you decide and we'll explore those together. But first, some of the problems. The first I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of names and a lot of small characters in the secondary world of Gamearth, and they're not particularly original names, and they're rather forgettable, and it makes it a little bit difficult. I found it difficult to follow along with who I should actually be paying attention to. Not a big gripe, not a huge gripe, but a gripe nonetheless. The big problem, and it relates to the portal fantasy aspect of this, is that there's actually a very small amount of time spent in the primary world, and yet there is a fundamental mystery about the book, which is actually very interesting, in that two of the game players in our world are both seemingly bored with, but also possibly afraid of, the some aspect of Gamearth and the game. And we don't know exactly why. And I wish that had have gotten explored a little bit more. Now I know this is a trilogy, but I feel like short shrift was given to that, and we needed to be led a little further into that mystery. And then something happens here which I did not particularly like a move, but it's related to this, and that is halfway through the book, though, something happens in the game world which causes a cataclysmic change to the map's terrain. And all of a sudden now we are brought back to the primary world, and we see our game players around the map, and they visually see the map magically change in front of them. And the response we get is something like, one guy kind of says, wow, that's weird, and one guy is kind of like, there must be some explanation. But it's not seen as reality shattering as the event actually would be to any normal human being who experienced something like that. And this is related to something I find a problem for me in horror fiction oftentimes. Something so shattering to the worldview of a normal person will happen, and oftentimes the character just kind of shrugs it off. Now, you don't want to stop the book and have these people all have nervous breakdowns when they see this magical act occur in front of them. And perhaps it's a clue that these people have already seen or know something is happening magical with the game previous, but that's not indicated to us particularly. So it seems like an extremely revelatory act that occurs, and it is portrayed as such also within the secondary characters, but we are kind of left with the characters shrugging and carrying on. And I just feel like if you're sitting around on a Sunday having a game with your friends and you saw reality completely change in front of you, there would be a bit more of a reaction. There is a another thing which I did not particularly enjoy, which is that within Gamearth there is a technologically developed, almost steampunkish city where our medieval fantasy characters go to. Now, I'm just not a big fan of that. I don't actually like mixing widely disparate technological civilizations in a fantasy world. That's just me. Is it a bugaboo? I don't even know what bugaboo means. It sounds right. Perhaps it's simply a personal bugaboo. I don't like that. I don't like when fantasy worlds go from the medieval into a gunpowder type civilization. It just simply doesn't work for me. Yeah, and then in terms of the other small problems, it does lag a little bit. It gets a little bit boring. It just simply does. It lags a little bit. Not terribly, and it's a good length for a book. I think it's about 300 pages. I moved through it relatively quickly. There are not even so much sections that lag, but there is some boredom involved, which again maybe was a masterstroke by the author to say, see, this is becoming boring, and that's why the characters in the primary world are bored of the game itself. But not a great experience for a reader. Not bad, just not great at times. Now that point leads us into two of the themes which I found really interesting here. First one's rather short. So the characters in in the secondary world, rather, as I've said already, are aware that the game is becoming boring, and and the game is their life. So they talk about their ancestors and how their ancestors, fairly recent ancestors, were involved in a great war to protect the citadel and the city, and how people used to go out adventuring more often and get find treasure, explore dungeons, this kind of thing. And these characters feel like the world has almost come to an end because they say at some point, like, so many of the monsters have been slain already, so much of the treasure has already been found. One of the characters is kind of a guy who just stays and reads about the old times. He doesn't really actually experience the world very much. And I found that interesting. It's almost kind of like a resignation on the part of the youth in this book, that the world is no longer a challenge, that there isn't anything else to go out and explore anymore. And I thought that was handled well, and it's actually resolved well in the book too. That that tension between these younger people who then actually force themselves to go out and try to change something and do something, and do go on an adventure, and how then expertly Anderson does this, that it's unclear if that is happening because of the primary characters making the campaign more interesting to try to lure the ones who are getting bored of the game back into the game, or if it is happening from the characters themselves, because that is part of that existential kind of issue here with this entire novel, which is, are the secondary characters ensouled? Do they have a soul? Do they have a consciousness that is free and separate from the primary world. And it seems like yes, but it is limited to some degree. And there's this kind of dread on their part because they know that everything in a way is kind of decided for them in the dice roll, which they're going to be rolling. But I think they know that somehow that what they call the outsiders, which are the game players, their fate is kind of in their hands in terms of the actual dice roll itself, which is interesting. Okay, the second theme, I think this is important. Our adventurers come upon a sacred forest, which is populated by typical fantasy type creatures. They're half human, half panther people. They're kind of like half centaurish, but they're not centaurs. They're panther type people. They're kind of hippies. They really love their sacred forest. It's very important to them. It's part of their spirituality, their god, everything. A disaster comes upon this forest, and it's burned. Now, there's a lot of details to this, which I'm not going to get into because it's not particularly important for my broader point. And I also don't want to spoil this for anyone if someone's interested and wants to pick it up. So let me tread carefully here. The forest is burned. Sacred objects are destroyed. The culture of the panther people is part and parcel of the terrain. And it is suggested at some point by one of the adventurers after this occurs, well, they say, and this, let me stop for 1 second here because this is something that's also clever about this. The terrain are in hexagons, which you'll see is a common thing in role-playing games as the way it's called a hex, but it's really just a hexagon-shaped terrain piece, right, that are fitted into each other. Something really clever is that in the secondary world, the characters just take this as the natural order and state of things. And there's even like a theory about like, well, of course, that's how a forest would turn to a plain. There would have to be a designated exact line. Like it's very smart. I won't go into it because I can't remember it exactly, but it's done extraordinarily well. But the point is here that one of the characters says, well, look, there are other trees in the hex next to this forest. We can simply repopulate your forest with the trees from that hexagon of terrain. And the panther people are justifiably and correctly upset about this idea and reject it. And they say, no, our place, our home, our sacred forest is original and of itself. It can't be replicated. I think this is an interesting theme because the idea of just replacing trees with trees from somewhere else is a top-down spreadsheet reasonable idea if you don't have a sense of place or a sense of home. Sure, you can just take trees, those trees are the same, and plant them there, and isn't it the same thing? But the panther people reject this. And I reject it also. It's technocratic thinking. And I support the panther people of Gamearth's forest because they take a different angle to this and how to rejuvenate and regenerate their sacred forest. I find that interesting. I find that interesting in the times we live in today, where oftentimes technocratic solutions are imposed upon people, and in some way of thinking, it is reasonable or it makes sense, but it isn't correct. It isn't right. And the panther people will have none of it. Neither will I, friends. That's going to do it for this video. I was going to do a short video. I keep saying to myself, you're going to sit down and do a 10-minute video. That's all it's going to be. But I have many things I want to elaborate about Gamearth by Kevin J. Anderson. Can I recommend you pluck this volume from your shelf? I don't think that this is an excellent book. I think that it is an innovative book for the ideas it brings. And I think that within that proto-lit-rpg subgenre, which probably was invented here, that there are interesting ideas abounding, but probably only 2 or 3. And unfortunately, I'm not sure I'm going to go on with the trilogy, even though I actually am interested in the resolution of this mystery. However, I'm afraid I would be disappointed if it wasn't done really well. So if I see the second volume of this or the third somewhere, I probably would pick it up to complete the set and maybe read it, but I probably won't be seeking it out. It didn't quite work structurally to want to push me towards wanting to know the resolution of the mystery. Even though I do want to know it, it didn't quite leave me on the correct cliffhanger to make me go and purchase the second book in the series. Unlike a book, which I'll be doing a review of relatively shortly, but which I'll stay mum on for the moment. Okay, that's it, Justin W. Blair. I want you to like. I want you to like if you like, and I want you to dislike if you dislike it. Hit the thumbs down. No one ever tells you that. If you don't like what I've said, thumbs down. Is that an option anymore? Didn't they take that option away for some reason? Technocratic thinking, that if so. Well, you can just write in the comments thumbs down then. I believe in the sacred forest of the Panther people, and I believe in your right to comment. I also believe in your right to subscribe, which I'd like you to do. That will do it for this evening. I'll see you on the next video.